Hey there, this is Jen T. Grace, founder and CEO of Publish Your Purpose, and I am here for a book launch interview with Ellen. How are you doing today, Ellen?
I'm doing great, Jen. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining and obviously all of your hard work and efforts in getting your book both written and published. So I see that you have the visual right to your left, which is just and I said this before we went live, like it has like such a beautiful like way that it's like subtly sitting over there. Well, I just want to first kind of just share who you are and a little bit about your book, and then we'll just kind of get into some other conversations.
Sounds good. So my name is Ellen Patnaude, and I'm the founder and CEO of Lead Quine. I'm a communication coach, and I wrote this book because all of my business went virtual in 2020 when the pandemic hit, as everybody's did. And I just found I was having conversation after conversation with teams and individuals who were struggling in their professional relationships with each other because of assumptions.
Mm.
And it just kept coming up over and over again. So I decided to take a closer look at this. I started writing some blog posts about assumptions, and it seemed to pique some interest, and not very many other people were talking about it
Mm.
as the pervasive problem that it is. So I decided I was going to do a little bit of a deeper dive, and the concept kind of took off from there.
Yeah, and so the full name is I Thought You Knew, and then Confessions of a Chronic Assumer and How You Can Stop Guessing Your Way Through Important Interactions.
Yes,
Love it. I know it obviously I'm biased, but it did take us a while to land on that specific subtitle.
it did.
So what and I also think that this kind of hints at a little bit of I don't it's not playfulness. Like there's like a snarkiness or like an entertainment value. Like the just your writing style in general and just who you are. Like there's a little bit of I don't know what word would you say?
Uh, Unpretentious,
Sarcastic, a little bit of sarcasm.
sarcastic. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know if it's because of how I grew up, or if it's because I'm not. There's not a bunch of letters after my name in terms of having degrees and all that kind of stuff. Um, I just don't. I'm very real, and I guess it's a bit of a gift. I just kind of call it like I see it, and so I write very much like how I speak.
Mhm.
And it is playful because, I mean, if we're not laughing at ourselves,
Mhm.
it's harder to take anything of value out of the experience. So I do a lot of somewhat uncomfortable self-disclosure in this book. I tell some stories that made me a little nervous. If clients
Mhm.
read these, what are they going to think? But I just feel like that's the only way to really get at the heart of what's going on. And how can you ask someone else to be brave about really looking hard at their own situation if you're not willing to do it yourself? So
Yeah.
that's how it went.
Yeah, you're essentially leading by example in that regard, right? Because it is hard to let other people let their guard down, especially
Hmm.
around things assumption wise, right? Because oftentimes, like I remember my dad when I was like maybe 10 being in the garage surrounded by like sawdust for whatever he was building and him looking at me and saying, "Never assume because you make an ass out of you and me." And I feel like that's such a common thing that's said. But
Yep.
I remember that moment so distinctively. And so while yes, we all know not to assume, guess what? We still do it all the time anyway. So how does this show up for because you already kind of said it, you're a communications coach. This book specifically tackles assumptions, which kind of stemmed from team building and teamwork and just I don't not dysfunctional, but teams miscommunicating during
Hmm.
kind of in their secluded, now we're in remote setting types of ways. But can you just give like an example or two, and whether it's in the book or just kind of something that's coming to mind of how this kind of like shows up in a team environment?
Yeah. So in myriads of ways, and I'll just try to land on a couple of solid examples for you. The thing about assumptions is that they are so pervasive that we don't even notice when we're making them a lot of the time. So the act of stopping and being willing to reflect on why you're not getting the result that you want, it's through taking that situation apart a little bit and really being honest with yourself, maybe taking a little bit of an emotional step back from it, to look at what's blocking me from getting the kind of result that I want here, it almost always seems to come back to some sort of an assumption that you've been operating with that is false or at least untested, right? So one example that I saw unfolding in several teams, I more do kind of like executive team coaching. That's sort of the model that I of how I work with teams. And I was noticing managers who or directors who are now in isolation from their teams that they're used to seeing in the office every day. People were not turning on cameras, or they were being resistant to how many virtual meetings they needed to be part of on a daily basis. And the managers or the leaders of these teams were making broad assumptions about why, about
Mhm.
what was going on with their team members. They also made assumptions that they must be multitasking if their camera is off, or they must not really be paying attention, or they're not working as hard,
Mhm.
and we're going to fall way behind. I had one manager who was in full on panic mode because he was brand new. He
Mhm.
was brand new to his position as a manager, and he'd never been a people leader before.
Mhm.
And so he just sort of went into a tailspin about with the assumptions he was making about the three members of his team and what they must be up
Mhm.
to. Um, and so that's the primary way that I've seen them come into play with a team is that we observe someone else's behavior and we assign meaning to that behavior. We make an assumption about why someone is behaving that way or not behaving in a certain way that we want. And we don't bother to test it out.
Mhm.
Another way that they show up pretty commonly that can also create a lot of problems because of the snowball effect is in not being willing to ask questions for
Mhm.
clarification. I wrote a story in the book about how, somewhere between high school and college, I feel like I noticed this shift that asking questions while still in high school to clarify your understanding of something was considered a characteristic of a bright student, of a good student, right? You get to college and all of a sudden you're asking a question and people are looking down their noses at you like, if you ask this question, you must be behind. It must be because you're slow.
Mhm.
And I remember feeling very distinctly in some of my early college classes that it was no longer okay to ask questions to get clarification, at least not publicly.
Mhm.
So I would make my business to ask the questions I needed answered afterward. But
Yeah.
too often people don't do that. They don't ask the question. They hear something. They're not really sure how to react or interpret it, but they
Mhm.
feel like they should probably just keep quiet about it.
Yeah.
You should just ask the question. If you ask the question, then everybody knows what the answer is. There's no more guessing.
Yeah.
Hence that part of the subtitle, stop guessing your way through important interactions.
Yeah. I find it so interesting because I feel like if you read leadership books, so often there are like qualities of what makes someone a good leader is asking the right questions. But yet, if you're not in a leadership position, it is like even if it's not overtly stated that you shouldn't be asking questions, I was going to say an assumption. There's like this, assumption that you can't, right? So I
Right.
find it just that kind of interesting tangle between the two, that a good leader knows how to ask the right questions, but god forbid your team ask.
I mean, I see examples of this all the time, right? Excuse me. Excuse me. It's true. And we also make assumptions as leaders that we have to have all the answers all the time. I know far too many executive leaders, people at the top of their organizations who operate with this belief that no one can ever see them make a mistake, and that they cannot ask for help, and that they must have all the answers all the time. And first of all, put your cape down, right? Like, get over yourself because that's ridiculous.
Mhm.
And it puts an enormous load on that person. But I'm sorry, why the hell do you bother to hire a talented group of people around you if
Mhm.
you are then not willing to use them for their talents and skill sets?
Mhm.
Call on them, ask them for help, ask them to step up to the plate and take on a piece, and then trust them to do their jobs.
Mhm.
There's too many leaders that get caught up in this belief, this assumption that if they're in a position of leadership, they have to have all the answers. And it's one of those ones that can do a whole lot of damage before somebody finally kind of falls on their face and is forced to reckon with it, or they burn everybody out around them, and then they're left with a shell of a team. So
Yeah.
again, that snowball effect can creep in and really do a lot of damage over time.
Hmm. Do you think you just said the word belief? Do you think that there's a fine balance between beliefs and assumptions?
So yes, in fact, the actual like definition of an assumption is believing something is true or will happen without any actual proof, although
Mhm,
there is no proof. And
mhm,
it's that although there is no proof part that kind of gets us into some trouble. And conversations with the faith community, you need to be careful about this because of course it's built on
mhm,
belief without proof.
mhm,
But in general, day-to-day relationship kinds of terms, believing that something is true without bothering to confirm that that's true is absolutely an assumption.
yeah.
And sometimes assumptions are totally harmless, right? We make assumptions all the time. My mother was very a very anxious person, a very controlling person, and my brother and I lived through our teenage years with my mother sure that if we did not come home on time or call, it was because we were lying dead in a ditch someplace. She used to say that all the time. I thought you were lying dead in a ditch someplace. I'm
Mhm.
not sure how many lives you think I have, but the number of times you thought that was true is problematic. But like also, I said in the book, if a coaching client doesn't show up for a Zoom meeting with me, I'm going to assume that they got busy,
Mhm.
that something came up in their day, or that they simply forgot. I am not going to assume that they came to some nefarious form of harm.
Mhm.
And so, the assumptions that, oh, somebody's running late, that's why they're not here yet.
Mhm.
Or somebody had something come up. Maybe there was a situation that had to be dealt with right away, and that's why they're not here yet. Some of those assumptions are totally harmless. Other kinds of assumptions can do an enormous amount of damage. Think of the way we project onto people. We label them in the workplace. Somebody gets labeled as a gatekeeper, or they
Mhm.
get labeled as not a team player or uncooperative. And those are projections based on assumptions about the motives of that person.
Yeah.
Why are they behaving in a certain way? We don't bother to ask why they're behaving in a certain way. We simply make an assumption that they're behaving in that way because there's something wrong with them or because they're blocking progress or a gatekeeper or whatever, right? Stereotypes, it extends all the way out to the ways in which entire groups of people get marginalized because of projected assumptions that we make. That's what stereotypes are. They are projected assumptions onto people.
Mhm.
So it can be really small scale stuff that's, fairly harmless, but it
Yeah.
can also be, life threatening to people that are in situations where they've been cast a certain way because of assumptions.
Yeah. Do you see an environment where assumptions, not all of them, but the majority can actually be kind of eradicated from that environment? Do you see that as a possibility?
I see that absolutely as a possibility when it comes to team dynamics, right? That microcosm of how we interact with the people that are around us or families, how we interact with the members of our family or our close circle. I think it's 100% possible
Mhm.
and very doable to remove or at least very significantly downgrade the amount of assumption that takes place in those environments. And my kids have been great guinea pigs for me in learning as a parent how to be careful about assumptions. My oldest son, Sam, is as a younger child, he's 19 now, but as a younger child, he was pretty keen about calling me out when I was making an assumption about something. You're not doing your chores because you're lazy. And he'd be like, actually, it's because I've got this pile of homework that I need to get
Yeah.
done and I'm going to do my chores later. Right.
Mm.
I mean, there's like lots of examples of that. So, but I think the family dynamics and then, your team at work, I think it's completely possible to remove assumptions from those environments.
Mm.
I think it's a much bigger ask and a much longer road to remove them at a societal level where they're happening, those stereotypes, the
Mhm.
ways in which groups are marginalized or targeted,
Mhm.
things that are happening with police versus people of color. I mean, those are assumptions that are being made about intent.
Mhm.
And those are the really dangerous kind of assumptions. Those are not going to go away easily or overnight. Is it possible? Of course, it's possible, but it is absolutely complicated to
Mhm.
figure out how we get there.
Yeah. What do you see as the number one, I guess, resistance? What is the stumbling block that people are feeling most resistant to of just stopping guessing their way through those important interactions via assumptions?
I really think underlying all of it is a confidence problem. It
Mm,
is a fear that if I ask too many questions, people will think I don't know how to do my job. They will think I'm not qualified. They will think I'm dumb. I mean, there's so many ways that we get in our own heads and that head trash shows up and it makes us feel like asking a question equals
mm,
less intelligence or less capability.
yeah.
And we just have to get over that because it's bullshit. I mean, it's just total unadulterated bullshit.
Mm,
Asking a question is what allows us to test, to make sure we understand, to make sure we're clarifying what the expectation is so that we can do our jobs properly.
mhm.
Not there's no trophies being passed out for guessing and then, screwing it up or guessing correctly and getting it right. There's no trophies for that. Ask the damn question.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
And so this book, in the writing of this, you've also created an online program that kind of goes with this. Can you share a little bit more about what that would look like? Because as I'm hearing what you're saying, there's so much to what you're saying. And as we've talked about before, with your book in particular, anyone who, is even watching this live while we're talking, like this book does apply to anybody, which I can't
Mhm.
often say about all books because there's a lot of books that are very, very narrow, but this one really does have a broad application. But I'm curious, like, what the course will do for somebody who's like, wow, I know I have an assumption issue or my team has an assumption issue. I'm curious, like, how the course can help support the, I guess, repairing of that.
Yeah, so the course is designed in a way that lets people look at 8 specific ways that assumptions show up. It's an 8-week course. So the idea is, first of all, there's a little time and space in between each of those sessions. So you can think about one concept at a time. You can notice, how is this unfolding in my life? How is this showing up in my life? And then come back and talk about the next one. But it's 8 different ways that assumptions tend to show up. It's based on the chapters of the book. There's 10 chapters of the book, so not everything is covered in the course. But I tried to highlight the things that are the most common
Mm,
and the most problematic when it comes to those workplace dynamics, but also, again, like you've said, just navigating conversations with people in our everyday lives.
mhm.
One of my reviewers was kind enough to say, like, if you work, live, play with other people, you need to read this book, which is you. Everybody needs to read this book, right? Something like that. He was quite funny in how he wrote it. And I mean, it's true because assumptions show up in our private lives, they show up in our public lives. So the course is designed to give you an opportunity to take a deeper dive into 8 specific ways
Mhm.
that assumptions show up. Think about what your own experience is with those things. We unpack it, we talk about where it comes from, and then we kind of rebuild. So what's a different way that you could approach this? What's a strategy you could try out in the coming week to try to avoid making this kind of assumption?
Mhm. I love that. I feel like, once upon a time I had a business coach. This was well over a decade ago, that her whole thing was just make one better decision per day to kind of get to the road of just being a better human. I feel like it's a really
Mhm.
similar thing here. Like just notice one assumption a day or stop yourself from making that one assumption. Like maybe you're assuming you're making the assumption in your mind, but you can stop yourself from actually saying it out loud, perhaps.
Yeah, I've noticed that's really true for me, right? So writing this book has been kind of a threshold experience for me, so like once you see it, you can't unsee it kind of
Mm.
situation, for better or for worse. So I am by no means assumption free at this point. Let me just be crystal clear about that. I am still screwing this up in various ways. The difference is that now I notice it a hell of a lot faster than I used to.
Yeah.
And so when I notice it, I can stop and think, okay, what is the situation? What is getting in the way of me getting the result that I want? And now how can I backtrack, be willing to back it up, let my pride and ego not get in the way of me backing up and saying, sorry, I need to test something out because I'm not sure that my base understanding is correct. So let me
Yeah.
just test this out real quick and ask a question.
Mhm.
Our willingness to do that has a direct correlation to our ability to make improvement in any area of our lives.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's a big thing for any sort of facilitation or coaching that I do. It always comes down to, how are you going to pick that one little thing that you could now try for the next week? I'm not sure that I think daily is a bit ambitious in my own personal experience, but certainly weekly, you
Mhm.
could pick one thing to focus on because then you've got an opportunity to really have experiences where it comes into play and reflect. In
Mhm.
fact, in the back of the book, there is a link to find a reflection guide that you can have access to if you buy the book. You can have access to that kind of walks you through daily reflections, weekly reflections, monthly, quarterly, annually, kinds of different stages of reflections where you can just build a habit of noticing
Yeah.
what is happening and highlighting things that you think, I should probably pay a little more attention to that because it didn't go quite how I wanted it to go.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I love that, and I love that you included that reflection guide because to me, and, books are usually like 20 bucks or less, right? Like books are
mhm.
not they're not a huge investment and they are accessible for the majority of people. But to have something that is as valuable as that guide, like I would buy the book, obviously I'm biased here clearly, but I would buy the book alone just based on that guide because it's like what a great tool to be able to just kind of like put things into perspective. And to me, like where my mind is going, and I shared the example of someone on my team and I both making assumptions just yesterday and clarified something that's been going on for 6 weeks. And it was just, and it wasn't even, it was just like a technical thing, like nothing emotional to it. But technically, we're just both on the wrong page because we're both assuming something in the wrong direction. But like my mind is going like, oh, there's this guide. Let me get the guide from Ellen, and then maybe there's a way we can integrate that into our team to just have those reflective questions on a team basis. Like, just think how much better your organization would run and be if everyone were just literally on the same page. So powerful.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, the questions in there, I mean, they're not rocket science. I'm not pretending to be smarter than I actually am. Let's just be real clear about that. But it's just that we're moving so damn fast all the time. We
Mhm.
don't stop long enough to just think, what is happening here that is preventing me from getting the outcome that I need or
Abs-
want? And then reel it back a little bit. And it requires enough self sense of self that you're willing to say, okay, I can see where I've kind of screwed things up here.
Mhm.
So I think that maybe I should backtrack a little bit and go back and, test out some of these assumptions that I can now see I've been making. It requires a little bit of self-awareness to be willing to do that. But if you are, then the results that you have the opportunity to get are
Mhm.
worth that momentary pain you might feel of saying, "Hey, I think I might have been wrong,"
Mhm.
right? Which for me is, I freely admit that I'm wrong. I just did so publicly in a book over and over and over again. Um, but
Yeah.
for other people, I mean, I was working with a leader just yesterday. Impossible for
Yeah.
her to admit out loud that she's wrong.
Well,
So for some people, it's a much longer road, but you can get there.
yeah, and I know this isn't what the book is about, but my mind immediately goes to like the psychology of it. Like what makes
Hmm.
some people be able to admit that they're wrong and what makes others, have to hold on to that, like their last dying breath. And so, there's obviously an extreme there. I am for one, and like you, also sarcastic in the same way, but like I'm the first person to say that I screwed something up. And I feel like fortunately, at least with the PYP team, like we are all operating that way. So like when something gets screwed up, we're all like, all right, let's just take a minute, figure out how
Hmm.
to fix it without any hostility or judgment or assumptions of like why it got screwed up. Because, I would rather know that rather than people hide it and try to sweep things under the rug because that's just going to make the issue even worse. So from a team
Exactly.
standpoint, there's so much value to what you've done here, which makes me very excited. And I think I want to see if like how we can integrate this into PYP and then I'll report back because I think it'll be fun.
Oh, thank you. Well, your 3 copies are on their way to your office as we speak, so
Oh, I love it. I
you
love
can let me know.
I love the efficiency of that. Sometimes it's like a year and a half later, and we're like,
Ah.
okay, one day we'll get those books. All right. Well, I think it's been said throughout. Clearly, you work with leaders, you work in team environments, you consult with folks, you're a communications coach, you're available for speaking, you have your program, you have a lot of kind of stuff going on. So I want to make sure that people know where they can find you. But is there any kind of last final things that you have to say?
Just that, on the website, there's a place where you can just book a conversation with me because you just want to understand more about whether or not there's even anything to explore. I'm not a pushy salesperson. And so I'm much more interested in just having a conversation with people to understand what's getting in your way, and is there some way that by working together I could help you fix that.
Mhm.
But it's, that's another word that comes to mind that I think describes me fairly well, which is just to be unassuming.
Mhm.
You call me up and we're going to have a conversation, and if I'm not the right fit for you, I'm going to tell you that pretty quickly. So yeah.
Yeah, another commonality. I'll talk to anybody, but I will be clear whether I can or can't help. Because there are,
Yep.
plenty of people out there that want to help everybody and don't really help anybody effectively. So you're not that
Amen to that.
though. Is a good
Nope.
thing. Neither am I. Ellen, this was so great. I'm so happy that we are at the finish line. It just makes me so excited when, especially when you actually have your book sitting next to you. It just
Mhm.
brings me as much joy to me as it probably did to you, like holding that book for the first time. So I'm thrilled that we're actually here today and the book is out and people can buy it.
Well, and I need to give some kudos to you because, as I share in the book, I had a pretty horrible experience before I found my way to you,
Mm.
and you made this whole process just amazing. So I cannot say enough good things about you and your team at BYP. So thank you for everything.
Yeah, we appreciate that, and especially coming from, without the details of the chaos from the previous situation.
Yeah.
It stinks. So, I'm happy to have helped and I'm happy that we're here. So, if anyone wants to buy your book, it's available in any online retailer. They're welcome to go kind of check it out. I'm a big fan of supporting local independent bookstores. You can walk into any of your local bookstores and ask them to order it and they can send it directly to you. You can use bookshop.org, which is an independent book publishing platform that just is a fantastic, like it supports local bookstores, even though it's an online platform. So we're big fans of bookshop.org as well. And obviously, you can go directly to Ellen's website too, leadquine.com. Make sure that you see how it is written down here so you get to the right location. And I think that concludes us, Ellen. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen. Such a pleasure. Had a great time.
Oh, thanks. I'll talk to you soon.